There's a truth so raw, so dangerous, that most people, especially women, don't want men to know it. It isn't about money, muscles, or status. It isn't about seduction, charm, or being alpha. It's about silence, about distance, about the decision to walk away from the noise of the world and claim solitude like a crown. The one truth women don't want men to know is this: the smartest men often choose loneliness, not because they've failed at life, but because they've outgrown the game everyone else is still playing. Think about it. Society whispers that a man's worth is measured by how many friends he has, how desired he is by women, how much he fits into the social machinery. But what happens when a man's intelligence soars above the machinery itself? Studies out of the British Journal of Psychology prove it. The higher the IQ, the less satisfaction men get from constant socializing. In fact, high IQ individuals report greater happiness when left alone compared to when surrounded by friends. To the average man, that sounds like misery. To the smart man, it feels like liberation. But here's the shocking twist. This very tendency threatens the natural order of mating itself. Evolutionary psychology shows us that women historically preferred men embedded in strong social networks, men who could provide security, cooperation, and stability. Women thrive in community. Men, however, especially the ones built for risk, innovation, and war, were wired differently. The lone wolf was the one who discovered new lands, wrote the forbidden books, cracked the impossible equations. He was feared, but he was necessary. And that archetype still terrifies people today, because when a man no longer needs the approval of the tribe, he becomes uncontrollable. Nietzsche once wrote, "The great man is necessarily a lonely one." Schopenhauer compared solitude to an eagle soaring high above the earth, untouchable, unbothered by the cackling of the flock below. And modern science is finally catching up to what these thinkers already knew. Solitude sharpens the mind. It isn't a punishment, it's a weapon. But if that's true, then why does society shame men for being alone? Why does it brand the solitary man as broken, weird, or dangerous? The answer lies in something far darker. And once you see it, you'll never unsee it. Loneliness has been sold to you as a disease. Scroll through social media, and you'll see endless posts about the loneliness epidemic, about how being alone shortens your lifespan, about how men without strong social bonds supposedly wither away. But let's tear the mask off that narrative, because buried beneath the panic is another truth. Solitude, when chosen, doesn't kill you, it saves you. Psychologists like Julie Boker and Thuy Nguyen have drawn a sharp line between isolation and solitude. Isolation is when you're cut off, unwanted, rejected. That can break a person. But solitude, voluntary solitude, is the exact opposite. It's a conscious retreat, a deliberate act of power. Studies as recent as 2025 show that men who embrace unsociability, not hostility, not depression, but unsociability, actually gain a boost in creativity, sharper focus, and stronger emotional regulation. In one experiment, solitude increased problem-solving abilities by nearly 20%. That's not decay, that's evolution. And here's where it gets dangerous for the social order. A man who thrives in solitude can't be controlled through shame. He doesn't need validation at the bar, the party, the office circle. He doesn't fear silence, because silence becomes his fortress. That's terrifying to a culture built on consumption, where you're supposed to constantly prove your worth by performing, buying, and belonging. Loneliness becomes a sales pitch. Don't be alone. Buy this, join that, date her, marry now. But if men discover that solitude isn't weakness, but strength, the entire system starts to crack. Women, in particular, are unsettled by this, not because women are malicious, but because evolution carved different needs into them. Across countless studies, females show stronger preferences for social stability and embeddedness. It made sense when survival hinged on group bonds for raising children. A man who opts out, who says, "I don't need the network, I don't need the noise," threatens the very structure women once relied on. And that is why solitude is demonized. Because when men stop chasing, stop begging, and start building alone, they become untouchable. But here's the question most men never ask. If solitude is this powerful, why do so few ever claim it? The reason cuts deeper than you think, and it reaches back to the primal laws that still govern our relationships today. The reason most men never claim solitude is simple: fear. Not fear of death, not fear of hunger, but fear of being invisible. Men are taught from birth that their worth is external, that it exists in how many women desire them, how many friends surround them, how loud their laughter rings at a party. But this is an illusion. And the cruel part? Women unconsciously reinforce it. Evolution made sure of that. Evolutionary psychology shows that while men historically took risks, fought battles, hunted and explored, women evolved to value social safety nets. A man with allies, with visible status, with social proof, that was the man who seemed safe to build a life with. And so men learned to perform, to be loud, to gather followers, to mask fear with bravado. The tragedy? The most intelligent men saw through the play. They realized that the very performance required to attract approval often destroys the silence necessary to create greatness. Newton didn't split his time between the tavern and the salon. Einstein didn't waste nights chasing validation. They turned away, and in turning away, they changed the world. And here's the bitter pill. Women don't want you to know that solitude is power because it exposes a paradox. If men discovered that their highest potential emerges not from chasing approval but from rejecting it, they'd stop bending their lives around female expectations altogether. They'd step outside the evolutionary script. And once a man steps outside that script, he becomes something else, something rare, something feared. Nietzsche warned us that the herd despises the man who walks alone. They'll call him arrogant, antisocial, even broken. But that's projection. The herd fears what it cannot control, and solitude, real solitude, makes a man ungovernable. It teaches him not only to survive without the crowd, but to thrive in spite of it. But here's the twist. Solitude doesn't just protect your mind, it rewires it. And the science of 2025 proves it in ways that are far more shocking than you've been told. In 2025, neuroscientists revealed something that should have detonated across headlines but barely made a whisper. Solitude doesn't just change your mood, it rewires your brain. One study in the Journal of Psychoneuroendocrinology showed that regular periods of voluntary solitude reduced cortisol levels, the body's stress hormone, by measurable margins. Men who practiced solitude reported lower anxiety and sharper focus than their hypersocial peers. Think about that. The man alone in a room, dismissed as a loner, is biologically calmer and mentally sharper than the guy surrounded by friends. Even more striking, researchers found that solitude enhanced creative output by 15 to 20%. That's not a vague guess, that's measurable. Men who spent deliberate time in silence produced more original ideas, solved complex problems faster, and were more resilient under pressure. This explains why history's greatest minds were not the life of the party, but the masters of retreat. Einstein would vanish into silence for hours, calling solitude stimulating rather than suffocating. Thoreau escaped into the woods, declaring, "I never found the companion that was so companionable as solitude." They weren't avoiding life. They were accessing a higher plane of it. Contrast this with the current cultural panic about loneliness. Every news outlet screams about the loneliness epidemic, but they fail to make the distinction. Loneliness is hunger without food. Solitude is fasting by choice. One is despair, the other is discipline. One weakens you, the other hardens you. Yet society deliberately blurs the line, because if men knew the difference, they'd stop buying the cures being sold. They'd realize they already hold the cure within them. And here's the irony. Solitude doesn't disconnect you from the world. It lets you see it more clearly. Studies from urban-rural psychology show that people in rural, quieter spaces report deeper satisfaction than those trapped in cities buzzing with endless interaction. Solitude acts as a counterweight to the chaos, a space where men can breathe, think, and strike with precision. But here's the part nobody dares to say out loud. Solitude doesn't just elevate men intellectually. It shifts the power dynamic between men and women in ways that explain why this truth is actively buried. And that revelation will rattle everything you've been taught about relationships. Here's where it gets dangerous. Solitude doesn't just sharpen your mind, it changes your value in the sexual marketplace. And this is the secret women don't want men to know. Because evolutionary psychology shows us that women have always sought men with social proof. Men backed by the tribe, men validated by others, men whose desirability was publicly confirmed. It's why popularity works as an aphrodisiac. It's why women are drawn to men in demand. Social embeddedness equals safety. That's biology talking. But when a man deliberately chooses solitude, he rejects that entire system. He refuses to play by the rules that signal value to women. And this is where the paradox burns hot. The smarter the man, the more likely he is to abandon the very performance that women unconsciously look for. High IQ men don't gain happiness from crowded rooms, from fake laughter, from the endless grind of networking. They thrive alone. But that thriving exposes the evolutionary fault line. Because if women have been wired to seek the socially embedded, what happens when the most powerful men step outside the social stage? It terrifies them. Schopenhauer saw this centuries ago when he said, "Almost all our sorrows spring out of our relations with other people." For the man who refuses to perform, the sorrows vanish, and that makes him free. Free from manipulation, free from shame, free from the invisible leash of needing to be liked. Women can't leverage his fear of loneliness against him because he's not afraid of it. He embraces it. And that single shift flips the script of power. Look at history. Newton spent years in near-total isolation during the Great Plague. Those years produced the foundations of modern physics. Tesla lived in solitude, despised small talk, and yet electrified the world. These men weren't rejected by society. They rejected society. They understood that genius dies in the crowd, and once a man learns to breathe in solitude, he becomes untouchable. But here's the twist most men miss. Solitude doesn't just make you powerful in spite of women. It actually redefines how women see you. And the psychology behind that contradiction is the key to unlocking why solitude is feared and secretly desired. The contradiction is this. Women may claim to want the socially embedded man, the popular one, the connected one, but their behavior betrays a fascination with the man who stands apart. The lone figure who doesn't beg for attention but radiates power from absence. Evolution wired women to fear abandonment, so when a man shows he doesn't fear being alone, he triggers both danger and allure. It's the mystery that haunts them. Why doesn't he need us? What is he building in that silence? That's the forbidden magnetism of solitude, and modern psychology backs it. A 2025 meta-analysis on gender discounting revealed that women often punish men who withdraw from social norms, labeling them arrogant or antisocial. Yet at the same time, the same men who demonstrate unshakable independence are rated as more competent, more creative, and more capable of leadership. It's a paradox that rattles the female psyche, disdain mixed with desire, fear tangled with attraction. This explains why solitude gets demonized as failure. If men realized that walking away from the crowd didn't destroy their value but amplified it, the old system of control would collapse. You wouldn't be chasing dates, you'd be chased for your distance. You wouldn't be begging for belonging, you'd be elevated for your refusal. Women instinctively resist this revelation because it undermines the leverage built into millennia of human mating strategies. The socially embedded man is predictable, controllable, safe. The solitary man? He's dangerous. Nietzsche captured this when he wrote, "The individual has always had to struggle to keep from being overwhelmed by the tribe." The struggle isn't just survival, it's sexual politics. If men stopped fearing solitude, they'd stop bending themselves into shapes to be chosen. They'd realize that greatness chooses solitude first, and everything else follows. But there's a darker reason solitude is buried under stigma. It doesn't just disrupt dating dynamics, it dismantles entire economies built on men's dependence. And once you see how deep that rabbit hole goes, the world will never look the same. Follow the money. Entire industries survive on men's fear of being alone. Dating apps, nightlife, luxury fashion, even half the entertainment industry. What are they selling, really? Not pleasure, not status, but the illusion that if you just buy in, you'll never face solitude. Swipe right and you'll be worthy. Wear this suit and you'll belong. Buy this drink and you'll be part of the tribe. It's a machine that thrives on your desperation. A man content in his own silence starves that machine. He doesn't need it. He doesn't kneel to it. And that makes him dangerous to more than just women. It makes him dangerous to the system itself. Think about it. A 2025 study on consumer psychology found that men with higher tolerance for solitude spent less on status goods, less on impulsive consumption, and were more likely to invest in long-term assets instead. Translation? The lonely man doesn't buy into the circus. He saves, he builds, he creates. He's not distracted by the endless race for validation. He's plotting, while everyone else is performing. This is why society screams at you that loneliness will kill you, because if enough men chose solitude, half the economic scaffolding would collapse. Bars would empty, clubs would shutter, dating apps would rot, fashion houses would lose their easiest marks. Solitude doesn't just free your mind, it frees your wallet. And that's why it's painted as weakness. A free man is unprofitable. Schopenhauer once wrote that the man who avoids unnecessary contact with others gains peace that cannot be bought. Modern science echoes him. Men who deliberately spend time alone show better impulse control, lower anxiety, higher resilience. They're harder to manipulate. They don't jump at every shiny hook dangled in front of them. And that kind of man terrifies both marketers and mates, because he can't be baited. But solitude does something even more radical than saving you from the system. It doesn't just protect you, it propels you. It takes men who would otherwise be ground down by conformity and launches them into greatness. And the evidence for this is written all over history. History is a graveyard of forgotten social butterflies and a shrine to the solitary. Look at the names etched into human progress. Newton, Tesla, Kafka, Beethoven. These weren't men obsessed with dinner parties or endless chatter. They weren't chasing the validation of crowds. They withdrew. They embraced silence, and in that silence they forged revolutions. Newton discovered gravity during a plague that forced him into isolation. Tesla wandered the streets alone at night, envisioning the future of electricity. Beethoven composed in bitter solitude, nearly deaf, yet leaving behind music that still shakes the world. And here's the brutal truth. The crowd almost never produces greatness. The crowd produces conformity. When you're submerged in endless interaction, your ideas dissolve into the average. The group polices originality. Solitude, by contrast, is the forge where individuality is smelted into power. Studies from the University of Buffalo and beyond show it plainly. Unsociability, not withdrawal from depression, but voluntary disconnection, boosts creativity, clarity, and innovation. It gives men the space to think thoughts so radical they would be ridiculed face to face. Nietzsche said, "One must still have chaos in oneself to give birth to a dancing star." That chaos cannot survive the suffocating grip of constant company. It needs the air of solitude, and the smartest men know this instinctively. They're not antisocial, they're guarding their genius. They're building in silence while the herd burns its energy on small talk. This is the one truth women don't want men to know. Solitude isn't a failure to attract, it's a refusal to dilute, a refusal to bend, a refusal to exchange greatness for approval. And when men realize this, the old scripts of romance, social climbing, and consumerism begin to look like cheap tricks. But solitude doesn't just create thinkers, it creates warriors. Men who step away from the herd learn a lesson the herd can't stomach: resilience. And the science behind solitude and strength will shatter everything you've been told about what it means to be mentally healthy. Modern psychology keeps repeating the same lie: connection is everything. Solitude is dangerous. But the newest research flips that script. In 2025, clinical trials showed that structured solitude reduced symptoms of anxiety and depression more effectively than group-based interventions for certain high IQ men. Why? Because solitude gave them space to regulate, to breathe, to think, without the constant pressure of performance. The herd says, "Talk it out." The solitary man says, "I'll think it through." And the data proves him right. Men who can sit with themselves without distraction develop an emotional armor most people will never touch. They don't collapse when they're ghosted. They don't spiral when their social life dips. They've trained the hardest muscle in the human body, the mind, to stand unshaken. That's not fragility. That's power. And power, especially mental power, is always framed as a threat when it escapes the system's control. Thoreau knew it when he built his cabin by Walden Pond, rejecting the noise of town life. He called solitude a delicious society. Today's scientists echo him. Solitude is not an absence, it's a presence of clarity, of control, of self-mastery. And here's the secret: women sense this strength instinctively. They might mock the man who withdraws, call him antisocial, brand him as weird, but deep down they know he's training a muscle they can't afford him to have. independence from their validation. That's why the solitary man is both dismissed and secretly envied. And here's the final twist. Solitude is not the end of the road. It's the beginning. It's the foundation from which the smartest men decide whether they'll step back into society as masters or remain beyond it as outlaws of the mind. And that choice, what to do with the power solitude gives you, is the most dangerous truth of all, because the man who owns his solitude owns his destiny. And what that destiny looks like is the revelation you need to hear next. Here's the final revelation. Solitude isn't about running from the world. It's about mastering it. The smartest men know that true freedom isn't found in applause, approval, or attachment. It's found in the silence, where you answer only to yourself. That's why this truth is buried so deep, because once a man tastes real solitude, he can never be enslaved by fear of rejection again. He can never be bribed with false belonging. He can never be broken by loneliness, because he has transformed it into strength. Think about the pattern. History's geniuses, rebels, and visionaries weren't the ones begging to be included. They were the ones strong enough to walk away. Nietzsche said the great man is the lightning out of the dark cloud of mankind. Schopenhauer called solitude the fate of the gifted. Today's science confirms it. High IQ individuals don't just endure solitude, they thrive in it. Their creativity surges, their focus intensifies, their emotional balance stabilizes. In a world drowning in distractions and groupthink, the man who can stand alone is the last free man. And here's the one truth women don't want men to know. Once you stop fearing solitude, you stop needing the approval that their evolutionary instincts demand you chase. You stop playing the game designed to keep you predictable, dependent, and profitable. You don't become less of a man. You become more resilient, more dangerous, more untouchable. And that makes you irresistible, not because you're chasing, but because you've stopped. The reason smart people choose loneliness isn't because they hate life. It's because they see life more clearly than the rest. They know the herd suffocates. They know conformity kills. They know greatness is born in silence, not in the crowd. And when you understand that, you reclaim something modern culture is desperate to keep from you: sovereignty. So ask yourself this: are you brave enough to walk alone? Because the man who does will never truly be alone again. He'll walk with clarity, with power, and with the one truth that sets him free.